Today, we're shining a light on a stage of women's health that often goes overlooked: perimenopause and menopause. Now, here to share more on what's happening in your body, some of the symptoms, and how taking action can protect your long-term health is Dr. Tatiana Saavedra, a Baton Rouge native and trained physician. Good morning. Thank you for joining me again.
Thank you for having me again.
Of course. So we're continuing the conversation. Last week we talked about perimenopause and what that looks like leading up. We learned that for some people, some women, it can start in your 30s as opposed to, I think the common knowledge is 40. So we talked about that. So now as we start to transition from perimenopause to menopause, what's happening in that phase as we get closer to actual menopause?
That's a great question and a good way to kind of lead into this conversation. So we talked about that time frame around menopause, and we also kind of gave a little bit of a definition for what menopause is last time. And just as a reminder, menopause is when a woman has had her final menstrual period, and it's been at least a year of that. What we're seeing during that time is there's a lot of hormone shifts that occur. Primarily, there's variability in estradiol levels. Mm-hmm. And we also start to see that progesterone levels go down. Those are kind of like the two big primary hormones that we talk about. But then you also will start to see shifts in cortisol. And cortisol is one of those stress hormones that we can see. And in some women, we also might see that testosterone is starting to go down. The whole time frame of menopause, it kind of is defined based on how old you are when you kind of go through it. Mm-hmm. And so premature menopause is defined as occurring before the age of 40, whereas early menopause is like less than 45, and then late menopause is greater than age 55. And after you've gone through menopause, you're labeled as being in the post-menopause mm-hmm. Phase of your life. And the reason why these things become important is it kind of ties into aging and how aging occurs. And there's kind of two ways in women that we kind of mm-hmm. quantify aging. And one of them is chronological, which is kind of what you would think.
Right.
As we get older, physically we get older, our organ systems get older, and that a lot is determined genetically. Okay. But then there are some things that you can do to kind of help, fight that off. So people who exercise, eat really healthy, those are environmental things you can do to help that. Then in a woman, there's this concept of progressive aging, mm-hmm. and that is kind of predetermined. All that is the number of eggs that you have as a woman, and you start to lose those eggs every time you ovulate. What a lot of people may not know, though, is you are born with the number of eggs you will have for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. You will not make more. That's predetermined. Okay. And so the reason why this becomes important is we start to see those eggs kind of fall off with menopause.
Right.
And so now all of a sudden you're talking about this progressive aging really kind of almost ending mm-hmm. at the time that a woman goes through menopause. And so that becomes really important.
So when women start to go through menopause, what are some of the things they're going to see? I know that you can feel it internally, but how is it going to reflect on the outside? I know we talked about aging. Are they going to experience the sweats, the mood swings, or how is it different from menstruation and everything like that?
It is. Okay. So what's interesting is, estradiol is really what kind of drives everything. So as you start to see those eggs fall off mm-hmm. and those estradiol or estrogen levels fall, that's really when you start to see the symptoms that happen. And it's because we have estrogen receptors almost everywhere. Right. So obviously we think about it with the hot flashes and right. the night sweats, but we can see changes to skin and hair. So a lot of women might experience some hair loss or like thinning or drying of the skin. We also see bone loss. We briefly talked about that last time. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest one we are worried about is with falling estradiol levels, you're going to be at higher risk for bone fractures. And then also you lose skeletal muscle. And so muscle loss is also something else that we worry about. And then cardiovascular health, that's another big one.
Now I want to ask, let's go more into really quickly the hormone therapy and what women can do to kind of, help with the symptoms. I know we talked about exercising, of course. Let's talk about hormone therapy and diet really quickly.
Yes. So hormone therapy, for a long time it was really kind of frowned upon because we were basing everything on an old study. And as we started really analyzing it more, we realized, okay, we were not really using the formulation of hormones that would probably be the best. And we were also not using those hormones in the right age women. And so now we have pretty specific guidelines in terms of what hormones to use. We do prefer using estradiol, and then the two main formulations are going to be either in the transdermal patch or orally.
Gotcha.
And honestly, the majority of the time, the transdermal patches will have the least amount of side effects and possible adverse effects that can happen. I tend to tell patients to stay away from pellet therapy. So there are going to be clinics and other things out there that are going to try to really promote that, but there's really no evidence that shows that that's better, and it's just too variable in terms of how the hormones get delivered. So definitely estradiol and then progesterone too, depending on what situation you're in.
All great information. And next time I want to get more into the diet and of course what post-menopause and what life looks like once you finally reach the other side of the hill. So we're going to talk about that next week. Thank you so much, Dr. Tatiana Saavedra, for joining me this morning to talk about women's health, such an important topic, perimenopause and menopause. We'll have all of this information on our website, LouisianaFirstNews.com.